Hey Akash, how are you doing? Hey Akash, can you hear me?
Yeah, 1 second.
How are you doing?
Okay, there's it's saying I have to hit my space button to unmute myself. Do you know if there's like a way to
Mhm.
permanently unmute myself?
Yeah, it's working fine now.
Okay, interesting.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining the call. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. So we are live on YouTube and we'll get started in 2 minutes.
All right, sure.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get started. Thank you so much, Akash, for joining us today. Thank you everyone for taking out time for this webinar. Thanks to all of our attendees who are there on the YouTube Live. So let me share today's agenda. So we'll start the webinar with HiCounselor brief overview, and then we'll get started. We'll introduce you to our guest speaker, and then we'll have a Q&A session. It's a great opportunity for you to jump in and ask questions and have your questions answered directly from our speaker, Akash. Before I turn it to our guest speaker, I'd like to share some of the ground rules for this webinar. As you all are live on YouTube, you have the opportunity to put your questions in the comment box. Also, feel free to like and share this webinar with your friends so that they can also join it. When you post your questions in the comment box, I'll read it out to Akash and we'll have it answered. Great. So, what is HiCounselor? HiCounselor is an online platform where we help job seekers connect with the company insiders for one-on-one career advice and interview preparation. Imagine when you take training directly from someone working in your dream position and dream company. It can transform your chances of landing your dream job. Great. So let's start our webinar, How to Crack Software Engineering Internship with Akash Verma. Thank you so much, Akash, again, for joining us today and for taking
Yeah,
our
no
time for
problem.
this webinar. Cool. So, Akash, I'll turn it to you. And can you please share your education background and your internship experience? And yeah, it'll be great if you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Akarsh Verma. I'm a junior right now at the University of Michigan studying computer science. I started, so my first year, over the summer, I interned at JP Morgan. And then I went on for Facebook, and now currently I'm going to be interning at Jump Trading over the summer. So yeah, my junior year summer, and then we'll see where I go from there. Yeah, keep it short and sweet.
Okay, great. Thank you. And so, Akash, can you tell us about your journey to land software engineering internship at Facebook?
hmm okay, so at the University of Michigan, at least I'd say every September we have a career fair. So I mean, it is simply put, I'd say maybe like 500-600 companies come, they take over most of our campus, set up their stalls, and then obviously like we get in line to show the recruiters our resumes. And so we get around maybe a minute or two. We stand in a long line, then we get about a minute or two per or with the recruiter. to kind of talk through our resume and give them an idea of who we are as a person and what we can bring to the team. So obviously I did that for Facebook. And then I guess they reached out. They liked what they saw. They liked what they saw in my resume and what I said. And they gave me an interview, an on-campus interview the next week itself. So I completed that. And then I had a phone interview. I completed that, and then I received an offer, I would say maybe 2 weeks later. So pretty quick process, but yeah, it all started with a career fair on campus. So yeah, so that's kind of the short and sweet version again of that.
That is amazing. No, I must say. So, Akash, I know like these career fairs, like even for these big companies like Google and
Mm-hmm.
Facebook, the line is really, really long.
Yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
and as one student cannot doesn't get like more than 2 to 4 minutes of attention. So
Mm-hmm.
what did you do in those 2 to 4 minutes so that you ensured that the recruiter gets your attention and you make an impression so that you get an interview call, because
Yeah.
that is really, really important for everyone to know.
Right. So I think at first I should preface this by saying like these lines are long, right? They're like 2 to 3 hours, and these recruiters are seeing. I mean, I'm just gonna throw a random ballpark out there, but they're probably seeing 500 students. Like I've seen those resume stacks; they're huge. And so obviously, if you say something generic or just say like the normal thing that everybody says, then it's hard for someone to remember you. I mean, just physically not very easy. So I would say that it's really important to start off with what you're really strong at and what you've worked on, like as in your experience. So kind of again, you have like 2 minutes, so it's important to first like start off with who you are, just like a quick introduction of who you are, your grade, your major. And then it's important to quickly pivot into projects that you've worked on. So I find that kind of helps the most, is being able to show a company that you have experience working in some sort of like large scale or just like interesting projects that require a lot of different like coding backgrounds, or that you could actually apply at Facebook. So for me, I quickly moved, like once I introduced myself, I quickly pivoted into discussions about 2 projects that I did at a hackathon. And then I kind of said to the recruiter that if you want to walk through my resume more, then here, you're welcome. And then that's kind of what we did. We talked about my past internship experience at JP Morgan. We talked about let's see, what else did we even talk about? Just some of the skills that I got to apply there. And how I was working at a team, just the generic stuff. But I think what was really important was that right off the gate, I showed what value I would bring to Facebook in like the first minute. And yeah, again, like these recruiters see so many people. And so I think that's very important to have them do as little work as possible, and to just be prepared with what you want to say, and to to kind of show that you could be an intern there.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. Great. And so what was your typical day as a software engineer?
Oh, I think you cut out there.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so I repeat my question again.
Mm-hmm.
So what was your typical day as a software engineering intern at Facebook?
Yeah, so I'll also preface this one by saying it's different for every team, and it's different for every company. But I mean, generally, you come into the office, you have some sort of agile stand-up meeting where you discuss with your manager and your team what the team is working on. Because again, like you're part of a team while you're there. Like you have a manager, there's other full-time employees with you. Sometimes there's more interns. So for me, there was another intern on my project. But you essentially just so it's an agile stand-up, right? It's the standard. You talk about what you worked on, what needs to be done, your current progress on your work. That's probably about the first. That was about the first 30 minutes. I'd come in at like 9 a.m. and then I would get straight to work on the stories that I'd created. So if you don't know if those of you watching don't know exactly how agile works, so you have a big project, you break it down into like your components, and then you break that further down into like stories, and those stories are like little features or yeah, I guess features is the best idea or best description. Features of your project that you want to complete. So you essentially would quickly get to work on that. There'd be a lot of help around you. This is, I guess, true of like majority software companies. Your managers, other full-time employees working with you. There's always a lot of help. And so that was super useful. But essentially, I would get to work on my project, get help from those around me. Yeah, I mean, the office in general is super, like, again, this is probably true for most software engineering companies, at least in the Bay Area. The offices are super fun. So at least with other interns and all your friends, it's always like, it's encouraged to take mind breaks, to go play ping pong or go, I don't know, it's just taking breaks when you need it. But other than that, yeah, it was just a very collaborative environment where you're encouraged to share your ideas, work on your project, get help when you need it. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I mean, that's probably a good
Mhm.
description of that.
Yeah, no, definitely. It sounds like you had a lot of fun as well as the learning
Yeah,
at
they
during
make a
your.
point to have a bunch of intern events. Again, this is probably true for several software engineering companies, but they make a point to host constant, like every weekend or so, some fully paid for event where you can just go hang out with other interns, network with full-time employees, and just have fun in general. So they make sure, because again, we're college students, right? So they make sure we're
Mhm.
having fun
Yeah,
over the summer as well.
definitely. Thank you so much. And what was your job search strategy to find
Mhm.
this position?
Right. So I mean, as a computer science major, I kind of like at the start, obviously, I knew what companies I was targeting. There's I'm sure everybody has goal companies that they want to work at. But beyond that, I think the most important thing to prepare for are the interviews. Right. So it's hard enough to get the interview, right? Like you have to stand out to the recruiter, but once you get the interview, you have to be constantly prepared to have gotten that interview. Once you get the interview, there's no time between you hearing about it and actually having the interview to prepare. So I think I would say I started the search around September. Like every year, I start around September, and then prior to that, maybe like beginning July or August, I begin like preparing for the technical interview. Just because there's so much content to cover. Obviously this is over the summer, so we're all busy and we can't constantly be preparing. But you need to I think it's really important to spend the time beforehand and even during the interview process, like during the months in which you're interviewing, to just keep your interview skills sharp and keep your technical ability just sharpened up. So that, in a moment's notice, if you do get an interview, it'll be very easy for you to actually do the interview, and you won't be scrambling to prepare, because that's honestly the most important part. You can wow your recruiter, but at the end of the day, what really matters is if you can perform in the technical interview. And so that's, in my opinion, the most important part of the job search, is actually just keeping your interview skills sharpened for when you do get an eventual interview.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Akash. And as we already talked, Akash, like resume was really an important part where you grabbed your
Mhm.
recruiter's attention out of like 100 other people. So what would you recommend to highlight on resume, especially for software
Right.
engineering internship positions, so that candidates get interview call at least?
Right. I think again, like the two most important sections are experience, as in work experience, and then projects. So those need to be like right under, or right in the middle for the recruiter to see. There needs to be like a bolded experience and a bolded project section. And then within each of those, I think it's really important to discuss the actual value you created with those projects. So like for work experience, for example, let's say I worked on a project with some company. I want to describe in as statistically as possible, or as quantitative as possible, the actual measurable effect I had on the company, right? Like if I made something 50% faster, say you made it 50% faster, use as many verbs as you can. Like I created this project, I managed this team, or I renovated, or essentially just describing as thoroughly with verbs and quantitative information your actions at the company. Because again, like this is what for each work experience you have two to three bullet points, and you want to describe maybe 2 to 3 months of your life in those 2 to 3 bullet points. And so having the actual like quantitative effect, I think in my opinion gives the recruiter as a concise way as possible what you actually did. And then in the project section, again, like you're not going to be describing how you affected the company, but you should be able to describe the skills that you developed and the skills that you can now apply at a job. So whether it's coding languages or even like GitHub or frameworks, whether it's like TensorFlow or something, and in general, like machine learning skills, whatever it is, just being able to describe what you learned and how you actually applied those skills on the project is really important. I sometimes see on resumes people giving very vague descriptions of what they did. Like I built a website, or I built a personal website to display my photos or something, but frankly, that doesn't give any effect. It's much more important to say I built this website using these languages. I overcame these problems. Maybe this way I employed this to fix this. I made it scalable, whatever it is, whatever you did technically, describe that as specific as possible, and what you learned and will be able to apply in the future. So yeah, I think that's the most important, is being concise and using good action verbs, quantitative language, and describing like what you learned and will be able to apply later.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I think that applies to many other fields as well, not just software engineering, like
Right.
quantifying and using the action verbs. So I totally agree with you. Thank you so much. My next question, Akash, is what topics or subjects would you recommend candidates to prepare before applying for software engineering internship positions,
Right.
especially when they're studying at school?
Right. So I'm sure a majority of universities have a algorithms course. So at University of Michigan, it's EECS 281, and it's the data structures and algorithms course. So first of all, taking that course, a course like that is important. If you're in university, trying to take that as soon as possible is a great idea, just because generally those cover a lot of the topics that you will be learning or will be tackling during your interviews. I took that during my interview search last year, and as I took the class, my interviews got better and better. And like my first interviews, which were like at the beginning of September, actually with Google, did not go nearly as well as like later down the line with Facebook and Amazon, for example, just because I had more experience with the class. But down to like specific topics, I think I have never been through an interview without being asked some sort of array manipulation question. Like, and this is like a company, like 3 interviews with a company. One of them is generally some sort of, they give you an array, and then you have to parse the array for certain values or certain patterns, finding the patterns in this array. So knowing your like array manipulation questions, going through HackerRank or LeetCode for those type of questions is pretty essential. The second one is string manipulation or questions involving strings, whether it's you needing to keep an auxiliary array for character count, whether it's doing some sort of question where involving like creating valid sentences from a jumble, or doing like an edit distance, a classic edit distance question between 2 strings. I have been asked, yeah, either way, I've been asked string questions very, very frequently. The third I would say is graph. So graphs, whether that's binary trees and using recursion on that, or some sort of breadth first search, or even let's say like they give you a 2D vector, so a matrix, and ask you to go from point A to point B, and knowing how to do like some sort of breadth first search or whatever to actually find this path. Yeah, I'd say those three are pretty certain to be asked. Some sort of array, some sort of string, or some sort of graph theory question. Depending on the language that you say you're most comfortable with, there could be some sort of pointer. For me, like C++ is my language of choice, and so generally, I can get some sort of question involving pointers. And then the last one, this is more rare, but sometimes companies like to throw this in, is some sort of like dynamic programming question. This is a lot more rare. I've only been asked this like by maybe 2 or 3 companies, but it's good to be prepared on it just so it's not completely throwing you off. And I find that the whether it's like the top-down recursive solution or whatever, that the tips that you can take from these type of problems, you can generally apply to the other 4 I mentioned before. For example, like for these the recursion top-down in DP can help you sometimes using recursion in other sorts of problems. So knowing those, I think I mentioned 5. Knowing those 5 topics, maybe 4, are definitely really important. I've never gone through an interview without being asked one of the 5, and generally array manipulation is always somewhere in there, followed by strings and graph theory. So yeah, knowing those 3 in particular are definitely important. Let's see. But yeah, beyond that, I would say doing leak code, doing a leak code question once a day is very helpful. There's really good YouTube channels out there like Byte by Byte or CS Dojo. Essentially, these YouTube channels kind of help you through the process of how to think during an interview. Again, they have like a wide variety of topics. So if you have like a certain interview question, you can always type it in on one of these guys' channels, and they'll have a video where they kind of do a step-by-step breakdown of the interview question, how to think about the interview question, and how to form solutions under pressure. And that kind of also really helps with the mindset of being in an interview setting, how to break down a question when you've never seen it before and have no idea how to tackle it. These kind of YouTube videos will help with that as well. So in general, yeah, that's a pretty good starting point.
Perfect. No, I think these are really, really helpful topics. So, Akash, what is the interview format of software engineering internship positions? Like, how many rounds are there? Are these all technical or these behavioral as well?
Right. So this depends on the company a lot. I will say generally for internships, it's obviously less than full-time. So some of my friends who are doing, for example, full-time at Google will have a full day of on-site interviews. Whereas for me, it was two phone interviews, a coding challenge, and then 2 phone interviews. Yeah, I think, or actually I had 3 phone interviews, but most people have 2. But so essentially the internship format is less rigorous than full-time and generally involves phone interviews rather than on-site. And I'd say max 2 to 3 interviews. Palantir is probably the biggest exception I've had with that. Palantir has a behavioral and then a technical and then an on-site day followed by another on-site day. So they kind of throw all the rules out the window for that. All the rules I say, but yeah, I'd say the format wise, it's much more technical than behavioral. I would say they might ask the interviewer might ask a behavioral question just to break the ice, something like, tell me about a time you worked in a team, or I've heard Facebook pretty often. I wasn't asked this, but apparently pretty often they ask, like, imagine like a day at a perfect day at Facebook. What would that involve? So just kind of icebreaker questions to kind of get you thinking, and just so they know that you're not, or I should say, just so that they know that you could fit the culture of the company. So the company I'm going to be working at this summer, Jump Trading, actually later when I talked to my recruiter about how I did during the interview and she shared the notes, they actually took pretty detailed notes of those icebreakers and talked about how I would be a good fit at the company just culturally. So even though these are short and they are at the beginning of the interview and they generally don't factor in as much, or well, they definitely do not factor in as much as the technical portion, they're still important to expect and to, I guess, nail. So just knowing that they could ask these questions, like, tell me about the last time you worked in a team, just having a prepared answer for it, and being yourself during the interview just helps your interviewer feel more comfortable as well. Okay, so after that, let's say the interview is an hour, maybe that question will be like 7 minutes. That they will dive straight into the technical portion. So generally, they will give you a question. If it's a phone interview, then they'll have some sort of software, some doc sharing. The worst is Google Docs, but usually it's a little better than that, where they'll copy paste the question on there, talk to you through the question, or talk you through the question, and then maybe give you an example or two of what they actually want you to, what code they want you to write, and then yeah, it's the floor is yours, and it's your job to write a solution. So I mean, tips for that generally include, like, talking through your thought process as much as possible, and talking to the interviewer, not just being silent. That's probably the most awkward thing that could happen to an interviewer, is when the interviewee doesn't say anything for like a minute or two. Yeah, and just, I guess, having enough practice to make the question as expectable, or as recognizable as possible. So I guess I should also say that if it is on site, then these questions are always like whiteboard questions. And also these technical questions are usually, the difficulty is such that you can complete it during the time. And by this, I mean, you can come up with a brute force solution and then optimize it, ask your questions, frame an answer. You can do all of that within the allotted time. And so it's in your best interest to, again, like, explain your thoughts, talk through like a proposed solution, and discuss with your interviewer if that's good enough, or if there are pitfalls, and then start writing your code. I'd say the code writing is actually like the easier part. It's actually formulating what code you're going to write. And it's just really important, I think, to actually take the time to do that, because, again, you have enough time to actually solve this question. They expect you to do that, I should say.
Yep, definitely. Thank you so much. And we have almost reached at the end of our webinar. So I have one last question. So what resources or books would you recommend aspiring software engineering internship candidates to follow, so that they can prepare themselves for the interview as well as for the role in future?
Right. I mean, I guess like the holy grail or the Bible of interview study is Cracking the Coding Interview. That's obviously, I think 90% of the people on this YouTube live stream or whatever will know what that is. I think it's a really big book. It's very thick, and it's really important to know how to use it. Just like with any textbook, it's important to know what you need to work on, and to then use the book in a manner that will actually help you, because, again, it's gigantic, and nobody's going to do every single question in that book. And if you already know the topic, there's no point spending hours actually learning that topic. So I say, one of the most important books is Cracking the Coding Interview, but I think it's even more important to know how to use it and to not waste your time. And then beyond that, I think the YouTube channels I mentioned, CS Dojo, Byte. There's a ton. It's a popular thing nowadays to make coding interview question, or coding interview videos, like tackling how to solve them. I personally love the videos more than LeetCode, or I should also say LeetCode. LeetCode's the website where obviously, like, you go and answer questions, and that's great as well. It's just a big, huge question bank. But I would say the YouTube videos are generally the best for me, just because I like seeing how the YouTuber kind of tackled the question, essentially their thought process, right? Because you get to see how they started thinking of it, and then how their thoughts kind of progressed as they went along with the question, and that will help me or the viewers of this live stream kind of see how to tackle a question you have never seen before, how to think about questions, how to, like, if you're completely stuck, how to get unstuck, or just really understand how the algorithm, the solution has like truly works from ground up. And that I think is really important, because at the end of the day, once you do enough questions, actually, like, you can never do all the questions, but if you have a thorough understanding of a good subset, then every other question is some sort of rewording or some sort of combination of questions you've already done before. And so having that thorough foundation through these videos where they describe every step, it helped me a lot personally, even more so than maybe cracking the coding interview or just leak code in general. Again, at the end of the day, it's how you use the resources and what helps you the most. But I think those three, leak code, cracking the coding interviews, and then these, like, the plethora of YouTube videos out there, all three of those are more than enough to prepare for the technical interview.
Great. Thank you so much, Akash, for sharing your experience and your advice with all our software engineering aspirants. That is really, really helpful. So thank you so much again for taking time and for joining the webinar. We really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining our webinar today. You'll have this webinar recording available on our HiCounselor YouTube channel in the next few days. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.